Thank you so much for joining my sister and I. You were our early intervention coordinator. And I have to say, I was very sad when Damien turned 3 because it meant that we could no longer work with you. And you helped us so much in those early years. For those people that don't know, early intervention is from 0 to 3, and you can stop me at any time that I get anything wrong. But when I left the NICU with Damien, it had in his discharge paperwork that we needed to follow up with early intervention. I did not know what early intervention was. And during our first evaluation, we actually got rejected, believe it or not. It was during COVID, and they did our assessment over Zoom. And so it was very hard for them to really see what Damien could and could not do. And fast forward a few months later, when our pediatrician was telling us about getting some help, and then later physical therapist recommending we do early intervention, we got evaluated in person. And then we were matched with your agency. And of course, when they did the evaluation, they said they couldn't believe we would ever be denied and that we were definitely candidates for this amazing program, which offers families OT, PT, speech, as well as education. And I just wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about your background. How did you get into this work? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. And first, I just want to say that it was a pleasure working with you as well. And you really were, wonderful to work with.
Oh,
So
thank
I
you.
thank you as well. My name is Angie, and my husband and I, we are directors of an early intervention agency. And we service the 5 boroughs and Nassau County and Suffolk County, and do a little bit in Westchester as well. My degree is in general education and special education, so I'm dually New York State certified. Also, I have my school administration degree as well. Um, and what led me into this, so I always loved early childhood in terms of even back when I was in high school. I did a lot of after school volunteering work with the young population, like after school programs. And then in college, I volunteered at BOCES programs. And I always knew I wanted to do something in that field. I majored in psychology and general education, and I didn't know which way I wanted to go, but became a general education teacher. I had a passion for special education as well. So I then got my master's degree in special education with a concentration in early childhood. And then Bank Street College, I went, it's a college in Manhattan, and they had a wonderful program on school leadership and a concentration on early childhood. So I always loved the birth to age 5 population. So I knew that that's where my heart was. And then personally, the special education piece, I am I am a person with a disability myself. Some people say differing abilities, which I like that too. And I started losing my vision in 4th grade. And so I was a student with a disability. I had an individualized education plan, an IEP. And, you know, it's that experience kind of led to my path. And during that time, my mother, I saw what she was going through and it's interesting because as a child, you're like, Mom, why are you crying? But as I got older, I realized that, what she was really going through were sometimes people and professionals say they correlate it to when parents just, are told that there's a disability or developmental delay, with their child that they may go through like stages of grief and, from, being like, upset and angry and acceptance and all those stages. So that led me to, um, impacting the way that I think I try to work with parents and with families, because I don't know what it's like, because I don't, I'm not a parent with a child with a disability, but really to, keep that in mind when working with families.
I really felt that as I was working with you. It was definitely, and especially during early intervention when you're just discovering that your child has a disability, you talking about that process of the stages of grief, um, you're just sort of coming to accept it. You're just, and quite honestly, in a lot of ways, you're one of the few people that knew at that time um, that Damien had a disability. And so I valued so much our conversations and your support. And you also, as you mentioned, having the experiences yourself, knew other things to tell us about. Damien now has self-direction, which I knew nothing about, and that is because of you. And so I definitely agree that your background just makes you such a perfect uh, person for families to turn to during the early intervention time.
And so inspiring as well, because as you're hoping that your child who may or does have a special need, there's always that hope and aspiration for your child to move through whatever their challenge may be, to grow to be a flourishing adult. And obviously you were able to move through having a disability and now are flourishing to help other people, which is so inspiring.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
I was going to say, I know what it was like for us, with working with Damien, but can you kind of take us through what the process is like? So a parent gets this paperwork, they're bringing their child home from the hospital. Maybe it's the hospital that recommends early intervention. Maybe it's a pediatrician or something. What is the process for them, and when does your work start?
Anybody can make a referral to the early intervention program, as long as the child is birth to age 3 or a little bit under 3. So the referrals can be made by pediatricians. They could be made by parents. They can be made by, and usually that's where most of the referrals get processed. They get processed directly to the New York City Early Intervention Program. For the New York City families, for Nassau County, it's Nassau County, and for Westchester, it's Westchester. Every, I guess, borough has its primary main referral, even though it's a New York State early intervention program. And once the referral gets placed, the first person that families speak to is a service coordinator, which is how it was my relationship with you. It's interesting because when I first took on Damien's case, I was not a service coordinator with regard to the day in and day out. I know what it's like to be a service coordinator. I was a service coordinator supervisor. However, one of our staff members left,
Yes.
and there was a large caseload, and I had to jump in. I had to jump in and help out. So when you initially, though, at the initial process, that service coordinator is the family's contact. It is the primary contact. It is the constant contact. And the service coordinator is tasked with explaining to families what the process is of early intervention, what their rights are in early intervention. They explain that this is a no cost to families program, no cost at all. They explain that this is a voluntary program. So sometimes Hospitals may refer a family and the family does not want to proceed. That's okay. And they can say no, and then they can always come back. So it is their right to say yes or no, and that's a big one. Like I said, a service coordinator is tasked with explaining to parents what is the process of early intervention, what their rights are, and also then recording what are their concerns. So in early intervention, we are a family-centered program. So in order to determine what evaluations are appropriate or what evaluations should be conducted, it literally is linked directly to what a parent's concerns are. And from there, we also record their priorities. You know, what is it they want to see that their child is not doing that they would like to see, and how does that relate to their daily life? And also we record resources. So every family may have different types of resources. What strengths do they have? What support do they have? And what is it that they may need that's not EI related? For instance, WIC, SNAP, other things that they may need right now. So a service coordinator goes through all that and helps the parents fill out all the necessary documents. The service coordinator is responsible for filling out the paperwork. You parents consent every step of the way. We ask parents, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to do this? Just to make sure that they understand. And then from there, we set them up with an evaluation agency and they can choose the evaluation agency. We try to match them up with what evaluations have to be conducted. And then if a child is found eligible for services, then they go on to what's called the IFSP meeting or Individualized Family Service Plan meeting. And it's at that meeting where, again, the family's concerns and priorities and resources are going to drive the goals that are developed at the IFSP meeting and also what services the child is going to receive in addition to reviewing those evaluations. And from there, they can get services, and a service coordinator then is responsible for monitoring how services are going from month to month, making sure that therapies are effective, that the parents are satisfied, also that the providers are providing services as mandated on the IFSP, which is a legal document. And that's from beginning to end. And then one last thing is that the service coordinators are responsible for helping to transition children out of the EI program, to develop a plan and talk to parents about what their options are after the child turns 3, because we want to make sure that there's some level of continuous support there.
That was something that was so helpful to us. Well, two things that you mentioned. The one is the transition from early intervention into CPSE, which is overwhelming. I don't think we could have done it without you. So preparing us for that. And then the other thing you mentioned, is the parent feeling like the provider that they have at that time is effective and helping them. And you really help when there's a fit that isn't quite working. We had a lot of trouble finding a speech therapist, and you helped us get into the Smile Center, which was so helpful. And then the other thing I should say that I was very bad at, which is why I want to do podcasts like this, just to tell parents don't do this, is I was trying so hard to be positive. And in doing that, you can really start to lose services. So early on, Damien had a special education teacher, which was really helpful. And I remembered just talking about how well he was doing and how great he was doing. And when he was evaluated, they said, well, I don't think he needs the education anymore. And, oh no. So, that's definitely something that when you're advocating for your child, you want to make sure you're really honest about, some of the challenges that they are having, that it's not always great to see how perfect your child is.
But you're always looking, as a parent, you're looking through rose-colored glasses.
Yes.
And as Angie was saying early on, you're also going through the stages of grief, one of which is denial. And we had spoken early on that when you had that very first evaluation over Zoom, because you were in denial, you were talking through the evaluation to share with whomever was evaluating Damien to say, oh, of course he's doing amazing. He's not really delayed. And you were really trying to set the expectation for what you wanted to see as opposed to what was actually happening. So that was like a big downside of the virtual evaluation.
Yes.
I reflect upon how can I do better as a service coordinator with working with families, because service coordinators are not allowed to be advocates for families. We're not allowed to say, oh, this is what I think, because the early intervention officials who are at the city, who are the city officials, we don't have an opinion when it comes to that. We have, sure, we have opinions in our brains, but we're not supposed to share it or allowed to share that part. But what we can do is, explain to parents that these services, but also goals, are derived from what parents' concerns are. And we always go back to that. And if anything, more and more, I just did another training with the city, and they were really pushing through making sure that service coordinators really understand what is the primary concern of the family when it comes to their child. What are the day in and day out struggles when it comes to the daily routines? What do they want their child to do that their child is not doing, and why? Why is it important to them? So it literally like comes from the parents, because a therapist can say something and then the parent's like, well, I'm not really that concerned about that. So I think it's really great that you're bringing this up, because it really does come from the parents. And the other thing, when it comes to evaluations, the evaluators have to, children who get evaluated through early intervention are either found eligible based on an auto eligible condition, which an auto eligible condition would be extreme prematurity, like under 999 grams. That means that they're automatically eligible for the EI program, or Down syndrome. There are certain conditions, and there's a lot more, but there's certain conditions where those type of children will get an auto eligible diagnosis and can receive services, but they still have to undergo evaluations to determine what services are appropriate. And then there's all the other children who don't have an actual diagnosed condition with that leads to that is an auto eligible condition, that is, because not every diagnosed condition is eligible. So the majority of the children in early intervention, they have to qualify for services based on the criteria that is set forth by the New York State Early Intervention Program. And that criteria is very strict in terms of, well, how does a child qualify for services? They have to meet the eligibility criteria for a developmental delay, which could be a little arbitrary to families, but basically that means that a child has to have a 33% delay in one of the 5 developmental domains, or a 25% delay in 2 developmental domains. They also give the standard deviation version of that, which I won't share that with you unless you want me to. But the evaluators actually have to show in their evaluation reports why a child is eligible or why a child is not eligible for services, just to make it clear as well. And services then are based on the delays that the evaluators find. And part of the evaluator's job is also to record the parents' concerns and priorities and resources and what the parents are concerned about in their reports. That also is included. And then based on the delays in those developmental domains, whether it's cognition, social emotional, fine motor, gross motor, adaptive communication. That's how they get services. So if there's a speech delay, they'll get speech services. If there's a gross motor delay or a fine motor delay, they'll get PT or OT. If there is a cognitive delay, they'll get special instruction, or if there's a social emotional delay, they'll get special instruction. But if they don't see a delay in those areas, they won't receive those services. And that is, I feel like that's something that service coordinators and evaluators should explain more to families as they're going through the process to really understand.
Yes. And the other thing that I didn't realize until we needed it is that early intervention can also help parents get assistive tech.
Yes.
So Damien was able to get a walker through early intervention, and you helped us with that. You mentioned we could also get the tablet to help with speech. It's Proloquo, right? Is the
Yeah.
app there? There's a few apps
Mhm.
for speech delays. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how families can advocate for those things they may need?
We are tasked as service coordinators to remind parents of all the services that are available, that there's OT, occupational therapy, physical therapy, special instruction provided by a special education teacher, assistive technology for children who may need an assistive device. There's vision therapy, nutrition, there's social work services, there's temporary respite. So, and I might be missing some, but these are the services that are options of service delivery. It doesn't mean that if a parent wants it, they can get it. The reason why we tell parents of these services is a just in case. Meaning, what if a parent did not know that there was feeding therapy in early intervention and as part of another service? What if they didn't know it was feeding therapy and they're having issues feeding their child, or there's, choking or gagging, and they didn't know that they can get a feeding evaluation? What if parent didn't know that there's assistive tech and maybe they don't need it now, but they need it in the future? So we do have to remind parents that those services exist, and they don't get it automatically, but through the proper channels and evaluations, they can. Assistive tech, it just so I did bring it up with you because at a certain age, just given my experience, if children, aren't walking yet, and this is completely out of my scope of practice. I'll preface that it's completely out of my scope of practice. As a service coordinator, I can't tell parents that they need assistive tech, but I can tell parents that it's available and that they should speak to their physical therapist or their speech therapist to assess, is this appropriate for this child? And it's interesting because it was a learning experience for me working through this with you as well, because we did see some challenges and there was a lot of paperwork.
Yeah.
But at the end, I'm glad that it did all work out.
Yes, and feeding therapy too was something else that was invaluable to us. Damien had a lot of trouble with eating and choking, and so to have that support, as you're saying, this is all new to me. It's like for every parent, right? Every child is so different. So not knowing how to help him swallow. And I mean, I can't express how much help that was to us to have that feeding therapy.
Is there any difference between the services that are available in New York versus if you live in a different state? So does this follow state guidelines or federal guidelines?
So there is a portion of the federal that we follow. So there is a federal law. However, the states, there's a big difference between states. What New York State does and all the other states do is very, very different. You know, people have said, and I say people have said because I don't know 100%. I have been to other states, but they say that New York State provides the most services for children. Every state also So every state also defines what the criteria is for eligibility. So I know that's different. Um, New York, even though New York State is under the same umbrella, there's kind of some differences between Nassau County, for instance, and New York City. So in New York City, for now, if a child has a diagnosis of autism, they can get up to 20 hours of special instruction utilizing ABA methodology, for instance, because that is another service. In Nassau County, children who have autism will receive 5 hours of special instruction with for with ABA methodologies. So there is that difference between Nassau County and New York City, which is very interesting. However, New York State, and I preface this by saying New York State is trying to change that to also decrease the ABA hours that all children should get in New York State, but we haven't seen that yet in New York City for the hours to decrease. So there are differences from borough to borough. But there's definitely differences from state to state. Mhm.
What are some of the biggest challenges you find in working particularly in early intervention with children with cerebral palsy?
So the interesting thing is that I don't see a lot of cases of children in early intervention with cerebral palsy, and it just could be because of when they're being diagnosed with
Uh,
cerebral palsy. So um, the when children are really young, they may present with these motor delays. They're being followed by doctors and neurologists and other types of professionals. But sometimes we don't really see the diagnosis until they're even a little bit older. Um, in terms of the actual, what we do in early intervention, though, like let's say if we didn't have that cerebral palsy diagnosis, is that we work with what we actually see in terms of how is a child presenting and what are the parents' concerns and what evaluations have we done. So I don't see a lot of children, at least in our agency coming through. We don't see a lot of that.
that is such a good point because I think even when we started working with you, we did not have the diagnosis. We had
Mhm.
prematurity, we had developmental delay,
Mhm.
and those are very important. To get the EI services particularly.
Mhm.
And that's a really important thing, I think, to tell parents that they might be seeing certain things, particularly developmental delay,
Mhm.
feeding challenges, all the different things you mentioned earlier, so
Mhm.
that parents are still able to
Right.
advocate without that
Mhm.
diagnosis.
Mhm. And it's interesting because I even I didn't share this experience earlier, but I was a special education center-based classroom teacher in a special education preschool. That's how I started out in 2000. And I was there for 15 years. I was a special education teacher, then became an education director there. Um, there were some children that we were working with that the physical therapists and the OTs that were in our center-based program, when they would treat them, they would say, you know what? I feel like this child may have cerebral palsy. And there were three already.
Oh, wow.
So we had to work with the families and say, have you been followed? Have you followed anybody? So it's and I don't know, and it's an interesting, now I'm even curious to actually do some research myself to find out, well, what is the general age where children do get the diagnosis of cerebral palsy? Because now I'm curious myself. But I do remember that experience where sometimes the PTs and the OTs would see something and they would say something and we would have a meeting with the parents and so on and so forth. That's why it's so wonderful to have all these providers around because um, the PTs and the OTs and the speech, those licensed professionals, um, they really add a lot.
How is, you talked a little bit about it, how
Mhm.
EI is funded. This is mostly through the city of New York, and you said that it has the most services that you've heard. anyway.
Yeah.
But how is that being funded? How can parents advocate to keep this going?
Mhm. So it is federal money and it is state funding. So it's both. And it also, so service coordinators do collect the family's insurance information. Um, but but the insurance companies, they actually have a working knowledge and relationship with the state that the state will help to reimburse some of those costs by going through insurance agencies. But there's no copays to families. There's no penalties, no nothing. So New York State has a relationship with the insurance companies, and they do also help to fund the program that way. The only time in early intervention that we do not collect insurance information is if the insurance is not regulated by New York State. If the insurance is not regulated by New York State, we do not collect your insurance information because we want to make sure that, that something to the effect of you're protected by New York State insurance law and policies and things like that. So it just has to be regulated by New York State. But if you don't have insurance, that's okay. If you don't have insurance that's regulated, well, that's okay. You can still get services anyway.
You had mentioned that parents can self-refer. So if a parent has a child and they feel like they really need a referral to early intervention, what would be that pathway? Is there a number, a website? Like, what's the way that they would navigate that process?
Yes. So for New York City, they can call 311, which is easy. And they can indicate that they want to make a referral to the early intervention program. That's for New York City. Also, New York City has a great website. It's if you Google New York City EIP for Early Intervention Program, it has all this wonderful information about early intervention, um, parents' rights, parents' guide, but also resources for families, and also they can, access it that way as well. For Nassau County and for Westchester, you actually do call the Department of Health directly, or for for New York City, Nassau County, you can always call like an agency like ours. We also can help the parents make a referral directly to the early intervention program.
Do you know
Awesome.
how it works in other states? Is it similar? They would call their Department of Health, like if you lived in, I don't know, Georgia or
Idaho.
It's interesting. I've had some families who transfer out of state. At that point, we closed the case, but I would Google and I would send them a link and say, okay, I Googled this. Here's the link. And it's interesting, like sometimes it looks like it's part of the Department of Health, and then sometimes it looks like it's part of the school district. So I'm not 100% sure, but it's just a little different from state to state.
Yes. And I know in early intervention, the focus is more on health, whereas once they transfer to CPSE, it's focused more on education. Uh,
Correct. Yeah, we are a medical model, and everything is. It's an interesting type of situation because we're through the Department of Health. We are a medical model. We deal with diagnosis codes, diagnose conditions, disorders. Once you get to the Committee on Preschool Special Education, if they qualify for that program, then it's student with a disability. Every child comes in student with a disability, and that's the umbrella term. That's more. It's more education, academic. While early intervention, sure, it's a medical model, but it's really focused on the family. That's why most of the services are provided in the home in early intervention, because EI is really a more natural environment type of therapy. It's where services ideally should be provided in the family's home if they can. If not, there's other options like office space. but if they can be provided in the child's natural environment so that the therapist can see the daily routines, and then also help parents to implement those successful strategies during therapy into mealtime and bath time and throughout the day. That is the focus of early intervention. And also services can be provided in the daycare. So for instance, parents are not present during those times, but services can be provided in the daycare. The number one goal, no matter where a child is receiving services, and I try really hard to try to communicate this with families, is to communicate with your providers and ask them, what can I do at home? What strategy have you specifically done in therapy that has proven to be successful one-on-one? And what can I do to now take this strategy to implement it into my daily routine to make it as natural as possible so that I can practice this without feeling like this is homework? So, because we've learned that, let's say if the child is able to now point to what he wants in therapy, that's wonderful that he can do it one-on-one. But mom's like, I still don't know what he wants when he comes into the kitchen. I still don't know. So now how do we work on transferring that skill that he could do on one-on-one therapy now to communicating his needs so that breakfast can go smoothly, so he can communicate what he wants. So that is probably one of the primary differences between early intervention and CPSC, though you would want that to happen in preschool. But it's the focus is it's all in like that in early intervention.
With this being a medical model, do you require a physician order or are you reaching out to the pediatrician to give a referral for PT/OT speech?
Yes, that's a very good question. We are required before OT or PT is provided to obtain a script. And now New York State has recently, this past September, changed the rules of evaluations that now we need a doctor's order to evaluate. We weren't getting those before, but now we do need a doctor's order. And part of the evaluation is includes a physician assessment that is completed on a health status form by the pediatrician.
And so is it only a physician or would a PA or NP also suffice?
Yes, I think a PA, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, that also suffices. Yeah.
Thank
It's
you.
such a good question, Marie, because I remembered Angie calling me saying Damien's prescription expired, so it has to be done every year. And I remembered having to do this rush to get back to the pediatrician so that we could continue his services at Smile.
Yeah.
Um, and that was where my next question was going because you were talking about how individualized it is. And for Damien, we did start with his services in the home. And then we found the Smile Center, which is a sensory gym, and found for Damien that that was a really good fit for him. And so his early intervention services started at Smile and then transferred through CPSE now at Smile. And to that point, I was going to ask you, how can parents find great agencies like yours? And then also, how can they find other agencies to find where to do their services? So it's a twofold question, I guess.
Full question. So New York City, EIP, NYC EIP, if you Google that, that has resources. Everything is posted on there. On there should be a provider list of all provider agencies as well in New York City. Um, the thing with so just to be clear, parents don't have to look for their own providers. They can look through the list. They should look through the list. They can make calls too. But the number one priority once services are approved, service coordinators are really tasked with finding providers for their child. So the providers call agencies to see who has availability. and the search starts. It's not easy, but it happens. But you should be able to get a list on the New York City Early Intervention Program, or just ask your service coordinator. So our service coordinator has access to the list, and definitely parents should have the list as well.
You've given us such incredible information. It's just like listening to you, just listing so many wonderful things. Is there anything that we're missing? What are some things that you feel like you'd like to leave parents with today? Things that we might have missed?
Know what your rights are, and just for some rights in terms of like, well, what are parents' rights in early intervention? You do have the right to say yes or no to any service. If you want to keep a service and decline another, you can. You have a right to leave early intervention whenever you want, and you have a right to come back as well. But when you come back, you'll have to do evaluations again. You have a right to receive copies of everything that is written on your child, and you have a right to review them and also ask for corrections to be made if there's a mistake. You have a right to privacy, so people shouldn't just be sending out your family's information left or right without your knowledge. You have a right to choose your ongoing service coordinator. You can change your service coordinator at any time, and it shouldn't be any hard feelings, because sometimes you just need a change, and you can ask for one. Um, and you can ask for evaluators. I'm sorry, therapists to be changed. Your service coordinator is tasked with monitoring services every month. And that is a way for you to be open and honest with your service coordinator if this is a good fit, if it's working out. And the other right that you need to know is that you have a right to due process and mediation and system complaints. So if you're ever and it's interesting because the early intervention officials go over the rights at every IFSP meeting, at every individualized family service plan meeting. And while it may be overwhelming because there's a lot of information, the one thing that they always say is you have your right to due process and mediation rights. If there's a disagreement, you can ask for mediation or impartial hearing. Or if there's a complaint very specifically on a therapist or an individual, you can file a systems complaint. But it is something that is there to families. So I think it's important for service coordinators or for parents to know that.
Thank you so much.
You're
This has been
welcome.
wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.